Inflation and housing, those are the two most common subjects that people are thinking about in the current economy. All of the other major stories of the world, there's wars in Ukraine, there's pandemic, there's many other factors, but what affects individual consumers and individual citizens in the United States most directly are inflation and housing. Both of those have a direct effect on almost everybody in this country, whether you're a renter, a homeowner, want to be a homeowner. This is affecting your life. So the question, $1 million question in everybody's mind is, what's going to happen to housing prices in the future? Are prices going to crash? Everybody has a historical reference for 2008 with the housing crash. It was a bubble. Prices went up and then they crashed. And based on that precedent, it might be easy to think, well, that's going to happen again. So let's just wait around for it to crash. So let's not look just at opinions, but let's look at what's behind the current price structure for real estate, both on rental and ownership, and look at different opinions and why they may be correct or incorrect. What are the facts? What are the data? What is the analysis behind these opinions? So the first one we're going to look at is a Federal Reserve governor who is on the board for the Federal Reserve, one of the major financial institutions in the country. His personal opinion is that he doesn't think the housing market is going to crash, and he's got a couple reasons why he thinks that. And we'll look at the reasons, not just his opinion, because you don't just want to follow an opinion. You want to understand the whys behind it so you can interpret for yourself what are the scientific facts or reasons behind something happening. And in this case, this Fed governor, his name is Christopher Waller, he has some reasons behind it. And we'll look at those. He says he understands home buyers, how it's difficult. And how does he understand that? Well, he says because he is trying to buy a house in Washington, D.C., and it's crazy, he said in a speech. He says, but even though house prices have gone up in the last couple of years, he doesn't see a repeat of the crash. The reasoning is because, unlike the housing bubble of 2008, this is sustained by supply and demand. And we'll talk about supply and demand. We'll look at the hard numbers on supply and demand about construction and needed houses. It's not being sustained by excessive leverage or looser underwriting. And that's what happened in the 2000s. Everybody remembers the mortgage crisis, foreclosure crisis, variable rate mortgages, the mortgage-backed security problem. That's what made the prices go up then. You had people who were buying houses with no money down, no income, no job. They called it ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. Ninja loans. If you could get a ninja loan, people were buying 2 or 3 or 4 houses. Living in one, maybe renting the other, maybe flipping a third. So that is where the demand came from in the market of the 2000s. It wasn't actual genuine demand for people who wanted a house. They were just saying, well, if you give me a house just with a signature, why the heck not? So here is an opinion from a reasonably well-connected person, a Federal Reserve governor, that has 2 factors for that opinion. His own anecdotal experience of trying to buy a house, and also his insight into the market, what's going on behind the market. And we talked about what it takes to get into a house. Well, the median home in the U.S. right now requires a down payment of almost $80,000. Many first-time home buyers don't have $80,000. Some do, some don't. But there's less of a demand, less of a demographic population that can come up with $80,000 for a down payment than in 2008 when anybody could buy a house, because you didn't need a down payment. You could do no money down or maybe $5,000 down. Cover your closing costs. That's one of the biggest difference. Even bigger, beyond the scope of this article, is many houses are being purchased for cash. So even if you are a first-time buyer and you have $80,000 and you want to buy a median home, you may not be able to. First of all, you may not be able to find it. How do we know you'd not be able to find it? Well, if the Fed governor can't find a house himself, what chance does a first-time buyer have? Less. Plus, even if you find a house, there may be 2 or 3 other offers on that same home for cash for the same price. So if you're a seller and you have a house that's median price, maybe $400,000, and you have an offer for cash from maybe a institutional buyer, maybe a corporate buyer, maybe just somebody who sold another house, had equity, and they're paying cash, and they have another offer from you, a first-time buyer, with $80,000 down, who are you going to take? Well, the cash offer, you don't have to worry about the mortgage getting approved, the appraisal, inspections. It's just a cash deal. It's done. So, first-time buyers, even if you have the money, it might be difficult. That's a fact going into demand. What about another perspective from Zillow? Now, granted, Zillow may have a biased opinion. Their business model is based on people being interested in real estate, but they're predicting more wild prices still are going to happen, price swings. Why do they think that? Why do they think that? Well, they say that they've gone up 20% already, an uptick larger than the period behind 2008 housing crash. But the next crop of homebuyers might have it worse. The home listing site now predicts that the next year will be 22% higher, an acceleration in price growth. Not just higher prices, but the rate that it's going up is even going to be steeper. It's even going to be more severe. The sales rate is going to go down. There might be less houses sold only because there's no houses for sale. But it would nearly be 4 times greater than the average since 86. The annual price value is continue to accelerating through the spring. The long-term outlook is that tight market conditions will exist, demand exceeding supply. And we'll get into that. Let's take a look at a sneak peek. What's the demand? America is short 5 million houses, only building 2 million a year. That's a sneak peek. We'll get into that. Crunching those numbers very hardcore. Why does Zillow think that? Well, part of it has to do with inflation. Inflation affects homes just like it affects gasoline, bread at the store, bacon, milk, shirt on your back, pair of shoes. The reason why is because home builders have to purchase materials for a home just like you have to purchase materials for anything else. Those materials are going up in price. Only one of those materials is commonly discussed in the news, and that is lumber. Lumber prices have added $18,600 to the average price of a new single-family home. Well, $18,600 isn't a lot. It's a real number. It's real money, right? On a $400,000 house, it's about 5% increase on a median price house. But that's not the only thing that has increased. Every other component in the house has gone in to the construction of a house: appliances, paint, sheetrock, plumbing, electrical, flooring. Every other item in that house has gone up. In fact, lumber is a significant cost factor of a house, but it's not the biggest. It's not the plurality. Most houses, the lumber, the framing, might be 20 to 27% of the cost of materials for the house. So if that goes up $18,000, what about the rest of the materials? If the rest of the materials are even 60% of the value of the house, well, if those materials go up the same amount, that could be an extra $70,000 or $80,000 on the value of a house. What materials are going up? Roofing, shingles, paint. Sometimes you can't even get it. Like many consumers, U.S. home builders are feeling an inflation pinch as the industry stares down rising costs and supply chain delays. National Association of Home Builders, that's the biggest trade organization, the number one problem is increased building materials cost and the delay in getting them. Everything from cabinets, garage doors, appliances, trusses, everything. In some houses, you can't even get the appliances you need to finish the house. How do we know this directly? Well, as you probably have seen from our channel, we are also a licensed general contractor. We see these facts validated and verified. Sure, we can read that the National Home Builder Association representative says it, but we see it firsthand. So there's a verification of that fact. Whirlpool says supply constraints and inflationary pressures will persist in 2022. Lumber prices have gone up and down, right? They've been up at $1,700 per board foot, down and below $1,000 per board foot. Now it's hovering in the low teens. The other day it bumped up to $1,500-$1,600 again. That's not the biggest problem. You'll see lumber prices going up and down. By itself, that's not the only factor. And if you see it go down, that's not going to be a thing that makes the houses cheap again, because it's going to go up and builders have to be prepared for that. Prices for lumber, talked about $18,000. Aluminum has also gained 56%. Well, what do you need aluminum for? There's a lot of trim work and moldings, valances, soffits that are made out of aluminum. Goes into the price of a house. That can add a couple $1,000s to the price of a house, depending upon how the construction is. Sometimes roofing is all aluminum. In addition to what they're talking about here, it doesn't mention labor. And labor costs have gone up because of having to pay higher incomes and higher wages to workers on the job, framers, construction providers. But more importantly, sometimes you can't even get the contractors, especially subcontractors, HVAC, electrical, plumbing. Those contractors are sometimes booked 8 to 9 months a year out. We talked with a client that's doing a construction project here locally, who spoke to an electrician for a relatively small job, adding a sub panel and some wiring. And the earliest that electrician could come was 7 months for a job that would maybe take 3 days, 4 days. So if you're talking about a complete new construction wiring package, wiring job, they may not be able to get there for a year. So what is the builder to do, or the home constructing client to do? Well, maybe you just pay more to get somebody to come sooner. If you do find somebody that will come sooner, they probably know that their availability is at a premium and charge you more. Who does this affect? The higher development costs have hit first-time buyers hard. And even interest rates going up hasn't slowed the building boom down. Let's take a look at another opinion before we get into some more numbers. Barbara Corcoran, who you may have seen on Shark Tank. Again, she may have a vested interest because she owns a real estate company or she's in a real estate business. But she says buyers should move quickly to avoid soaring prices. So she's seeing prices go up even more. It's not that, even if she was trying to do a sales pitch, it's not going to benefit her anymore. The same number of houses are going to sell whether she says this or not. She's just trying to get people to take advantage of an opportunity, because inflation and rising interest rates probably won't scare off home buyers. Instead, homeowners should jump into the market before prices get even worse. It's harder to get your hand on something that even you find acceptable to live with, never mind something that's a dream house. And we've talked about this in previous videos. don't necessarily get hung up on finding a dream house. Get something. You can make a house into a dream house, but first you have to get the house. The difference between an average house that's livable and a dream house is mostly cosmetic. If you want to redo the floors, the kitchen, the countertops, the paint, the windows, even if you want to add an addition, doing all that will be cheaper at this point than buying a turnkey dream house. And it's something you could actually do. There's nothing to be gained by waiting whatsoever. Literally nothing, she said. Again, take it with a grain of salt. She's in the real estate business, but she has nothing to gain by saying this. It's not like if she says this more, she's going to be able to do more deals with her agency, because it's an inventory problem. It's supply and demand. It's not a matter of getting more buyers. It's a matter of having sellers wanting to sell a house. Why don't sellers want to sell a house? Well, here's why. America is short 5 million homes. So it's like musical chairs, right? If you have a house, you're sitting in a chair. If you stand up by selling your house to go play musical chairs, now you have to find another house. Well, if America is short 5 million homes, that's like musical chairs with 5 million more people than there are chairs. So if you have a house, you're going to cling to it. You're going to make sure maybe you could buy a new house first before you sell your old one. You're not going to stand up from musical chairs and sell your house unless you have another one. So how close are we to closing this gap? 5 million houses. Well, let's take a look at construction rates. Here is March 17th, just a few days ago, new residential construction, right? The annualized rate is about 2 million. Let's round it off to 2 million. Okay? Seasonally adjusted annual rate, 1.8 million. That's a little bit below what the revised rate was from the month before. It's above, though, last year. So you might think, well, if we're building 2 million houses a year and we need to make 5 million more, well, that'll take about 2 years to catch up. Well, that's not true. Because at the same time we're building more houses, there are more people coming into the market that need houses. So only a certain percentage of these are going to take up the slack of the excess demand. Most of these are going to go to the new demand that's going to come out, because every year more people are coming into the market. So that 5 million is not a static number. How many houses were built from 2012 to 2021? 7 million. 12 million new households were formed during that time. So let's do the math on that. This is roughly 9 years, right? 2012 to 2021. So in 9 years, 12 million new households were formed. So that means about every year you need at least 1 million more houses just to take on the new households that are created that year, not to cover backlog. So if the rate of new households being formed stays the same in 2022, 3, 4, 5, and up to 2030, that means that 1 million of this number is just going to go to cover the new households that are formed. The other 800,000, maybe excess, can go to chip away at the 5 million backlog. Let's just say that that's all we need to do. There's no additional demand needed, no slowdown in building. Well, 5 million houses divided by 800,000 a year, that's going to take you 6+ years just to eat up that difference. Almost 7 years. Actually, that's not true. It's 7 years. So this backlog is going to exist for 7 years. If that's the case, then how long is it going to be until somebody like Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller is going to be able to find whatever house that he wants to find? Maybe 7 years from now, people will not have a problem finding a house. Maybe that's when the inflation on house prices will subside. However, during that time, what's going to happen to home values? It's going to continue to go up. And if it goes up even 10% a year, in 7 years, that's a double. You might say, well, 10% times 7 years is only 70%. Well, really, that's not true because it's compounded. So 10% a year really doubles in about 6.5 years. So if you bought a house today for $200,000, like we've talked about, in just 7 years, it might be worth $400,000 or $450,000. Now, that house may not be your dream house, just like Barbara Corcoran says, right? It may not be the house you've been dreaming about, but it may be something acceptable to live with, especially if you're currently renting. If you're currently renting, any house is better than an apartment. Probably have a yard, maybe a little more space. More importantly, your rent is not going to go up, because if you get a mortgage on a house, that payment is fixed. You can't get evicted unless you don't pay it. If you have an apartment, if your landlord, property owner decides, I don't want to rent this house anymore, I don't want to keep this as a rental, I want to move into it myself, they can kick you out. They can non-renew your lease at the end of your next renewal. Or they could raise the rent. If you own a house, even if the price doesn't go up double in 7 years, which is unlikely, you're still going to have a fixed amount for rent that'll probably save you money. Because inflation is going to happen? Yeah, inflation is going to happen. We've talked about that. So those are the facts behind, the numbers behind the house projection. So anytime you hear somebody that says, I think prices are going to go up, I think there's going to be a crash, I think we'll find out why. Don't just take their word for it. Why is the reason? If somebody says, I think the housing market is going to crash, why do you think that? Well, because it crashed in 2008. That's not scientific. Just because it happened before doesn't mean it's the same thing. Well, it went up before and then it went down. Well, it's not the same thing. The reason that it went up before is not the same reason why prices are going up now. Now, there could be reasons why it does go down. I'm open-minded. Well, you should be open-minded. But if you see a reason why you think it's going to go down that's in numbers like this, numbers like this, like the 5 million houses, that's fine. Look at those reasons. But if the only reason is because I think it is, my opinion, I saw it happen before, that's not an explanatory reason. That's not explaining things. That's just a guess. That's just like reading tea leaves, crystal ball. So you are going to have a reason why you want to have an opinion about the future of home prices. Your reason might be, should I sell my house? Should I buy a house? Should I stop renting an apartment? You're going to have a reason why you want to make decisions. Should I wait to buy a house? You want to have your decision based on facts and reasons, not just based on somebody's opinion or emotions. You want to have it be done by numbers. From what we see, from all of the different businesses we're involved with, insurance, building, surety bonds, finance, real estate, titles, all the businesses we're involved in all point to the same thing. It seems like the housing market is early stages of growth, not just like it's a blip and now it's going to crash, a bubble, it's going to pop. It doesn't seem like that. Nobody knows the future, certainly, but you want to use the best possible hypothesis based on facts, not based on opinion, gut feeling, emotions, what you wish to have happen, wishful thinking. You want to have it be based on facts that you can look at numbers and measure, or have somebody else look at numbers and measure for you. Because that way you're using math and science, not emotions and mystical predictions. Everybody's got an opinion. If you look hard enough, you will find opinions that can support any decision you make. But facts are not like opinions. Facts only are one thing. A 5 is always a 5. A 10 is always a 10. If you look at facts and numbers, that will help guide your decision so that it matches what your intentions are, not your opinions and emotions and feelings. We hope this is helpful. We have other videos in our content that will help you understand things like insurance, research, due diligence, real estate titles. And you can always contact us if you have questions. We have consulting and resources available for consumers and for businesses.